Mini Life, your favorite classic mini podcast on the web. We have a sweet one today. Don Racine from Mini Mania is here. He's going to talk about, one, how he started Mini Mania, two, about racing, which is super cool. He's been racing for a very long time, so I'm very excited to hear that story and share it with you guys. We hit a huge milestone. As this podcast is being recorded, we hit 1,000 listens or downloads or whatever the podcast world calls it. So super cool. Thank you so much for the support. Please go share it with your friends. Let's blow this thing up. Let's get some more people on this podcast and share their stories. Enjoy the show. Stay tuned. Email me, theminilife37@gmail.com. Follow me on Instagram, minilife.37. And like I said, enjoy the show. All right, I think we are live here. We have a special guest, Mr. Don Racine. Thank you for being on, sir. How are you today?
Not bad. Not bad for a Sunday morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And Don, I don't know if you've seen the show yet or heard it, but there's been, we do video. Not everyone watches the video, but there's been a contest, I guess, of the coolest background, and I think now you took the cake here. There's been a lot of guests on with their minis in the background, and I see that the garage there with the yellow Mini in the back. It looks awesome.
Yeah, it'll become a race car here, not before too long.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you for coming on here, and I think this is going to be a cool episode. I really want to kind of dive into your race history, and obviously we can't talk to you without touching on Mini Mania and kind of how that started. But, I followed Mini Mania for a long time. I had my first car was a BMW Mini, so I naturally found Mini Mania for parts and things like that. And finally, when I got my classic Mini, obviously Mini Mania has classifieds and articles and parts and everything. So I appreciate all that you guys do for Mini Mania, so I couldn't not have you on this podcast. So again, thank you very much.
How long have you had your classic Mini?
I got my first one in 2016 or 17, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many,
so I've had it.
How many have you had?
So I have two. I have the Rover Mini. And I followed Mini Mania's article. I believe you wrote it on SPI to carb conversion.
Right.
So I have that one. And then last year I found like a garage find, a barn find, if you will, of a Mark I Austin Cooper S. So
nice.
It is apparently it was a race car. It had like plexiglass windows and stuff like that, but it's a shell and has the engine and everything outside of it. So it's a big project.
Does it have a roll bar in it?
It doesn't have a roll bar in it, but it looks like it had provisions for like different seats and harnesses and stuff like that. It's pretty much just a shell, but yeah, it came with a bunch of parts and like the Weber cutout, and so I'm trying to find the history on it, so we'll see one day if I can search down the previous owner. I think it was like a family friend that inherited or something like that. But I think it was a California car its whole life, so who knows?
Means it doesn't have a lot of rust then.
No, not really. It the only thing, it had a little bit in the battery box, so easy enough to replace. And it was just the vertical seams were de-seamed, so there's like little spots there. So that's going to be a headache, but we'll see. See how it goes.
Right.
So let's get into it a little bit. I want to know kind of a broad question, but how did you get into minis? What was your first kind of memory of minis? What attracted you to them?
I think I've told this story more than once, but I'll tell it again anyway. When I was a whole bit younger, I was racing in the East Coast, racing a 356 Porsche. And for business reasons, for livelihood reasons, I decided I had to move to California. But I bought another one out here. And it wasn't very shortly thereafter that the insurance company said, "Oh, you're a kid and you're in California and you're driving a Porsche. We got you." And I decided, this was crazy. I couldn't afford that for insurance. And I remembered when I was racing back there in the East Coast, the only thing that used to beat me was a little gray-haired old man in a Mini Cooper. And now I am one. I bought the Mini
So,
and never looked back. I think within a year I had three,
wow.
um, and then kept going from there.
And what year was this when you moved to California and switched over to minis?
I want to say it was like 72. And I started the business in 74, and I had them for at least a year or 2 years before then. So
Well, what
I'm
got
sure
you
that's
into
about right.
racing? You grew up in a racing family, and
Oh, no, I didn't grow up in a racing family. I just had the ambition to do it, and I did it. So,
so you said 72-ish, 74, you started Mini Mania.
mhm.
And I think, like I said, I've kind of followed you a while, so I've definitely heard some interviews or read some articles. Kind of understand the reason why you started it, but most of our listeners might not. I know we have a lot of people in the UK and stuff like that. Mini Mania is definitely a household name in the United States. But what inspired you to start Mini Mania?
I was on the West Coast, and there was nobody on the West Coast selling mini parts, and it was a struggle to get parts. And I had the opportunity to travel to the UK a number of times before I actually bought my Mini through other business things. I got to know some
Hmm.
people over there, and it became relatively easy to start bringing parts in. And I started out bringing parts in my garage, and it grew from there. I think I stayed in my garage for a year or so, and then we hired somebody else to help, and it grew and grew and grew.
Wow. I guess they say all the great companies start in their garage, right?
Exactly right. Yes, yes, yes.
That's fine. I had a business over in Hawaii, and we rented a storage unit garage, and kind of ran it out of that for a while because real estate and rent is very expensive there as well. So
Yeah, yeah. Not a cheap place to live. Worse than
no,
California. How's that?
yeah, it's hard to believe, but yes, it is.
Yeah.
So with racing, you started racing kind of just on your own, desire to. You were racing Porsches. Where at in the East Coast were you racing?
New England, Boston area.
New England.
Yeah, up in New England. Yeah.
Okay. And is this like circuit racing? Did you start off in
I
autocross? How did you
started off in
start?
autocrossing. Yeah, yeah. The first, yeah. I did a lot of autocrossing over the years. Um, in California, I also autocrossed a killer moke that I had built.
You were autocrossing a Moke?
Yeah, I had a crossflow, 8-port crossflow head in it, and there were 10-inch wide tires, 10 by 13. It was
Wow.
Formula 5000 slicks that I ran on it. And even at Cal Expo, where the track is very, very fast, was very fast in the days, I could outrun Corvettes with it.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
The short story about that moke, by the way, is that I sold it, I don't know, a long time ago. And probably 6, 8 years ago, somebody called me and said that he wanted my help in selling a moke that he had. And I said, well, bring it to the racetrack and let me look at it. Well, I brought it to the racetrack. And of course, my son races with me too. So, he brought it to the racetrack, and it was a very reasonable price. And my son looked at it and said, Dad, that was your old moke. I want it back. So he now is in the process of restoring that moke.
Oh, wow. He recently got it
Yeah,
back.
well,
That's
we bought it
awesome.
back that weekend from the guy at the racetrack. So, yeah,
Oh, man, that's cool. That's a cool
yeah,
story.
yeah. The first Mini I ever bought was a 997. I bought it from a lady that was involved in racing. Um, the 997, as you may know, was not a very popular car. In
Hmm.
fact, I'm now in the process of restoring one. Um, Not the one you see behind me, though. Not that one. Um, the one
Okay.
behind me is a race car, or will be a race car. The 997, I think I kept it for a fair period of time, and then dropped the bigger motor in it, of course. And I think at almost the same time, I bought a wagon for my wife, a woody wagon for my wife, and another street moke. I think I bought my first moke in about '73, and I've kept that. I still have that moke.
Wow.
Yeah, it still has the original paint on it. Doesn't have the original motor in it, but it has the original paint on it. It had an 850 in it, and I drove that in California highways for must have been 10 years. Finally blew up that motor.
Before it couldn't keep up anymore.
Well, it kept up, but it kept blowing up. So I ended up putting a 1275 in it. And then a number of years later, I don't even remember when, probably in the 90s, I would guess, we decided to develop a supercharger kit for the Mini, the classic Mini. And we were doing one for a small bore motor and one for a 1275. Small bore was the one we first developed, and the prototype of that unit was put into the moke, and I drove that for 15 years with a supercharged 970 brass motor in that one.
Did you race that moke too?
No, that was strictly a street car.
Sounds like a fun street car.
Yeah, it was. And in fact, I ended up pulling it out because my wife, it was very difficult to drive on the street. I mean, it's 970, which has to rev like mad. It's a supercharged motor. It just wasn't a fun street car. So I finally pulled that out a couple of years ago and put in a very, very stock, very tall final drive gear 1275 in it. Now it's just an easy commute, run around car.
Nice little cruiser.
Yeah,
that's definitely a bucket list car for me is a moke, especially in California. I live in Southern California, so
yeah.
A fun little one to cruise PCH, something like that. That would be fun.
Yep.
Tell me about, if you remember, what your first kind of real race was. I know you started in autocrossing. Your first kind of racing, was it with the Porsches?
No,
and then
the first, when we were autocrossing the East Coast, you would run on a racetrack. That was more like Solo One than it was autocrossing.
Okay.
And the West Coast, everything was a parking lot type autocross.
Right.
And I don't remember exactly. I had a Cooper S that I was. I don't know, they called it national championships at the time or not. At least a West Coast champion autocross class. It was a J production class car. And I think it was probably after that I decided to go racing. And all of it was in vintage racing at the time. In fact, when I first started vintage racing, they wouldn't even allow a Mini to run. I ran it a couple times. And here's another quick short story for you. I don't remember when. I guess I had already been racing for a year or so. And my son decided to build a car. And I must have hurt mine or something. I don't know. All I remember is that I borrowed his car and insisted that we put a limited slip in it because he didn't have a limited slip. And I knew that I couldn't possibly race without a limited slip. So we put a limited slip in the car. And most stories I've heard about people racing cars say they loaned their car to their son and they wrecked it. Well, I did the opposite. I borrowed my son's car and wrecked it. So I thought that was turn around and fair play. Yeah.
What happened? You just got a little rowdy?
Actually, we were at Sears Point, and a guy, the Mini, when you turn a Mini, it turns, but it will actually push at times, and particularly in the old days before we really understood how to set up a car the way we do today. I was going into turn 7 at Sears, and I was going on the inside, which is always my favorite place to be, on the inside of a corner. And an MGA decided that he'd go around the outside of me and didn't give me any room, and the car just pushed right into him. Oof. Yeah, nothing I could do about it. But anyway, he actually.
Wow.
My daughter still has that car. That car stayed in the family. My son is now driving one of my other cars, one of my old cars that I've had for a million years. And my daughter started driving that race car that my son had built. So
She's racing it or just
she
cruising it
was
around?
racing it. She hasn't raced in the last couple of years, but she was racing it, and it's still a race car. It hasn't stopped being a race car. I mean, it's not street legal by any means. So
How many of your kind of those original cars that you first started getting, the first minis, do you still have? You
well,
mentioned a
the
few.
Monty I still have, of course. That was the first race car I had was a Monty. We decided to build a car for show, and we decided to build a replica of the Monte Carlo car, one of the Monte Carlo cars, LBL 60,
Hmm.
and we built it, and it was just an absolutely gorgeous car. And decided it was had full cage and full bar, and it was race ready. And that's the one we decided to race first, actually. Um, and we raced that for forever. But it was the very first. I don't know if it was the very first one, but it was one of the very early minis to try to run vintage racing. And in the very, very early days, they wouldn't allow a mini. I mean, it was too early. I mean, it was only they were still producing them and the whole bit, and it wasn't old enough to suit them. And they thought it was too easily modified, too easy to cheat and make a car faster than the competition, et cetera, et cetera. So I ended up racing a few other cars in the mean. And then I don't remember again. I lose track of time easy at my age. Um, but at one point, my son decided we had the 177, the Monte Carlo car, wasn't being raced at the time because I was racing other cars. And then he decided he wanted to go racing, and thus we put that one back on the track. And I bought another one for myself, and then another one, and another one, and another one. And so.
I think I have. It's the Monte Carlo, the 177 number one. That's the one you're talking about.
Yeah, that's the one that was my first race car, first mini race car.
I don't. I don't know if I have. If you can see it on my wall, I do have like a poster of it. It's kind of like in the corner here, but I also have have the little Lego
Yeah,
version of it too,
you got a number
sitting
of
on my
those.
desk.
Yeah. My son has become the real keeper of that car, and it's just you go into his office, and it's just nothing but the car, pictures of the car and trophies he's won, and he's done quite well in that car over the years. He's a very talented driver.
That's fantastic. That's awesome to hear. I like those stories that you kind of you're not just buying and selling them. You really have kind of some connections to them as
Well,
well.
his
Kind of hard to without the mini kind of does that too. I feel like.
I think for me, the biggest part of it is the history. I'm fortunate that a number of my cars have some real history. Now, the Monte car was a replica, but if we think about the fact that it was raced in the mid '70s, I think was the first logbook was in the mid '70s with it that we created. It now has history. That's 40 years old. Um,
Yeah.
and it's not quite as old as a couple of my other ones that I have from a historical standpoint. I've got some that were raced in the late '60s. Um, but they were real race cars, real. What is real today, and vintage is very much real. But these cars were raced in the Midwest Council or in SCCA, et cetera, back in the late '60s.
Yeah, see, I think that's so cool when you kind of find that the podcast that's coming out tomorrow, a gentleman, I think you might have interacted with him. His name's Marco
Right.
Carrera, and
Yeah, I know.
his Rally Mini. We were talking about the history of that and all the articles it's been in and all the awards it's won and races it's won. It's super cool. That's why I really want to try to dig a little deeper, see if I can find, I don't think my S had any significant history, but I think it was raced around California, and I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
it's the stories behind the car that's definitely
yes,
cool.
and I think it's important for us to preserve that history and to keep all that together. I mean, I think the cars are great, but the history is even better. So if you don't keep the history with the car, then it's crazy. When
I agree.
I had something called a Deutsche Bonnet, which is a French car, and I ended up into a museum back in Tennessee. And the neat part about it is they got all the history of the car. They got all the log books that I had, all the when I went back and saw it again a couple of years ago. I mean, it still has my seat in it. It has all my stickers on the roll bar, etc. So it's nice to keep the history with the cars.
It is. I agree. I think I mean, that's why I started this podcast, is because I wanted to hear the stories behind the cars. I mean, we could talk about, minis all day long and what different types and all that kind of stuff, but the stories behind them are super cool. And that's why I was really interested in, sitting down and chatting with you, because I know you probably have a lot more stories than that, Instagram hasn't heard.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the scene nowadays is, the internet with social media and stuff like that. Everyone's doing these cool outlandish builds, which are definitely cool, but I think the history of the Mini kind of gets lost a little bit. Just it's kind of turning into another car out there just for clout. And I kind of want to bring back the history of it and these stories and kind of bring them to light.
Yeah, we're losing a lot of the people that were part of that history. It's sad to say. I think back over the last number of years, and the number of people that have passed away and were part of that history, generating that history, at least here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid we are losing some of that, and I'm hopeful that somehow, some way, all that gets laid down someplace and is preserved. Because that's really what the cars are all about, is the history.
Definitely. And that's like I said, that's why I'm kind of doing what I'm doing. And I know a lot of people are out there, engine swapping, this and that and the other thing. And that's why I kind of try to be a little bit of a purist, just because I like these cars are old now, and there's definitely some history behind them. And I think it's important to kind of, carry that legacy on. So.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a place for everything, and obviously the swapping of motors and doing things like that is a place for that. After all,
Of course.
They built over 5 million of these things, and all of them don't have history.
Of course.
But
of course.
You can take an SPI car and put a VTEC in it. I don't care. I just don't want you to do that with a Mark I. That's all.
Oh, of course not. Yeah. No, my SPI car, I was like, at first I was like, oh, it's, whatever SPI. But then I was like, I mean, I guess it is technically a Rover Cooper. So yeah, maybe I'll have value one day, but it's, I don't know. So I like the A series, but that's, another story, I guess. So I know we kind of talked a little bit about racing. Yeah. You've mentioned a few different things so far. Tell me how, or a little bit of your process of how you kind of prepare for races, and like what goes into getting the Classic Mini ready for racing.
Well, I don't want to be discouraging, but you got to remember that racing is an excuse to spend money. So, it's very difficult to do it on a shoestring. But in the same breath, if you compare preparing a Mini to race versus almost any other car except maybe a Formula V, they're a very rational way to do it. I always tell everybody, concentrate on the safety things and the reliability things, and learn how to drive first, and then worry about making it go fast. You can spend $40,000 on a motor if you want to, but if you don't know how to drive it, it won't make any damn bit of difference. Setting up the suspension and even a rational way, a very conservative way, and most of the vintage groups require a relatively conservative suspension. You can't go radical with coilovers and all that kind of stuff. So, and the Mini doesn't have a lot of options for suspension. You're gonna, for the most part, you're gonna run the rubber cones. You can do camber, caster, toe, and that's a critical part of it. But whether or not you have the understanding of exactly how that's set up or not isn't critical to get out there and run. The longer you're out there, the faster you want to go, and therefore you will require some sophistication and understanding how to set up the car. But you put a roll bar in it. The transponders are not cheap these days to put a transponder in it, which is how they keep track of your lap times. but it's really not that terribly expensive to get out there and at least try it.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of something that maybe my goal is in the next year or so is just to kind of get out there, throw, like you said, throw a roll bar in there. My SPI car, that's now a carb, is, it's just got a 1275 and the basic suspension mods, and I'm not trying to make it anything crazy. I just want to, get some autocross in or something like that,
Hmm.
and kind of
Yeah,
a little more safe than the canyons.
I would advocate that an autocross is not a bad training ground. It is not. It teaches you some car control,
Right.
um, and if you can do solo one, which I think they still do here on the West Coast someplace, um, that at least gets you on a racetrack, so you get a little better appreciation of speed. The big thing you lack in any of that kind of event is the fender to fender, wheel to wheel racing that you get when you go racing, and that's
Right.
another learning. That's another learning experience to go through. Um, the opportunities are a lot. One of the things you mentioned your SPI car. I'm not so sure the SPI car would be accepted in maybe in Vera in your Southern California group. They might,
Right.
but up here as an example, they wouldn't accept an SPI car. It
Hmm.
has to be a Mark One, basically a Mark One car. Um,
Is
something
there
with
a year cutoff?
they don't say that per se, um, but 67, 68.
Really?
There are a couple 68 cars running, um, but that's not true necessarily across the country. I'm relatively sure, and I don't want to speak for Vera, but I'm relatively sure that Vera, the group down in Southern California, would not impose that restriction.
Yeah, that's
Um,
interesting because, generally they're, similar. You could still
no,
have the A series.
they're the same. They're the same car. You're right.
Right.
One has one has roll up windows. One has sliding windows. And
Right, right.
for the most part, roll up window cars are not accepted.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to switch my doors out.
Well, just run your new Mark One, your Mark One that you have, fix that up, make it put it back into a race car.
There we go.
I,
Hey,
I
that's
you
the plan.
you could autocross the SPI car all day long.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would like to kind of thrash the SPI car in autocross, and I don't know. The scary part is the S going wheel to wheel. That would be kind of scary, but you
Yeah,
never know. I
yeah,
think that's the plan to kind of bring it back to its glory of racing. So
yeah. I have to admit it's painful. I've damaged a few cars in my day, and it's painful to do that. But I
yeah,
always say that they are a car and it can be fixed.
yeah,
I've
yeah.
only had I've only had one car that I had to throw away that got so badly damaged I had to throw it away. Um, but it had history to it, but it wasn't a particularly nice car, so it didn't hurt too badly when I had to throw
What
it away.
caused it to be so bad? I mean, you could practically buy from Mini Mania every panel possible for the car.
It was full of Bondo. And, it hit the wall. I mean, I bought it with Bondo in it. I didn't. None of my cars have Bondo in it except that one. Um, it hit the wall at turn 10 at Sears at I don't know 80, 90 mile an hour,
Oof.
and it just absolutely destroyed it. And it could have been fixed, but I bought another one for half the price I could have fixed that one for.
Ah, makes sense.
In fact, the one you see behind me is replacing that one that got damaged.
Yeah, that thing's cool. If for those that are just listening, he has like a yellow Mark One Mini that's like a shell almost. I can't tell if they're subframes or anything, but
Now
it's nice.
the subframe is right there.
Oh, okay, I see it now.
Frame is there. That's the subframe. The front subframe is built. I need to get that in the car, but it's not ready yet. I got other things to do first. So.
So, what are some of the biggest differences in your race mini versus just a standard kind of daily driver? I know, like, we kind of touched on some of the suspension mods and stuff like that. What kind of really sets it apart?
Well, the engine. In all fairness, the engine is what sets it apart. The suspension mods, you mentioned that you've done some to your car. They're off-the-shelf type suspension mods. Nothing
Hmm.
special about them at all.
Hmm.
It's how you set them up that makes the difference.
Yeah.
We're not allowed to change pickup points. We're not allowed to do some really radical things that could make the car different. Um, but we're running stock Cooper S brakes. Nothing special about the brakes any place. Um, the adjustable arms that are on it are standard mini spares available, Mini Mania available, arms that are available, front and rear. So from a suspension standpoint, there's nothing. Um, I personally believe that you have to have a sway bar on it, so we add sway bars to them. Only for the rear. I don't do anything in the front, although some people do. I think one of my cars does have a front bar on it, but yeah. Anyway, so from that standpoint, you don't do anything different. A roll bar is mandatory. Roll cage is best, and in fact, had that car that was demolished had a full cage in it instead of a bar in it, it might have survived. I won't build another one without a full cage in it. In fact, you can buy the full cage from Mini Mania, amongst other places. It's just a bolt-in cage. There's nothing to do. Just bolt it in.
Yeah, easy.
Easy, right? And other than that, the wheel trick is strictly the engine and transmission.
And what do you do to that? I know obviously you probably bore it out and that kind of stuff.
Spend money. I mean, it really depends. I've got a number of the cars that I have. I rent out for rentals, and in those cases, the motors are relatively mild motors. You could run some of those on the street. That's how mild they are, and it's still a fun car to drive. You're simply not going to be at the front of the pack with those cars. First of all, they're typically drivers that don't know minis in the first place,
right?
And secondly, they're just out to have fun. If you want to be in the front, you're going to spend some money on a power unit. Trick gearbox, a trick engine, good crankshaft, good cylinder head, connecting rods, pistons, camshaft, you name it. Belt drive cam, 6-inch connecting rods, Carrillo or Arrow connecting rods, a billet crankshaft. Cylinder heads are a real problem these days. The one that's gaining most favor because of availability is the race aluminum head that Mini Mini offers. It's it's an off-the-shelf alternative. That's a good head. It isn't greatest in the world, but it's a good head, and you can buy it. So all the parts that go into the power unit are readily available. And power and transmission are relatively available. So, it's just really a question of, again, I would advocate anybody get started. Don't bother with all that stuff. Learn how to drive and learn what the car can do, and then you can graduate into that if you decided you're really serious about it.
And so, you've touched on a ton about that, but is there like a specific engine size that basically you would say is going to
Nope.
make you be competitive in this vintage racing?
Well, it obviously has to be a 1275, and for the most part, they're like 60 overs.
Okay.
The letter of the law, I think, says in a lot of groups, not most groups, in a lot of groups, the letter of the law says there has to be 47, no more than 47 over. But that isn't a easy to achieve number, since they come in 20, 40, 60 oversized.
Right.
So, I mean, I've got motors that I don't think I've got any 20 overs, but I got a number of 40 over motors and a number of 60 over motors, and people have been known to run 1380s. They're not quite as reliable because of their high compression. We all strive to get as much compression as we can. That's horsepower in these cars.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And so, what's the kind of line that you have to tiptoe, like balancing between the performance, the maintenance, and kind of keeping the historic integrity of these Mark I minis that you're racing?
reliability is defined as assuming you got decent components in it.
Mm-hmm.
Reliability is defined by a rev limiter. A stock crankshaft shouldn't be taking over $7,000. The good motors that I have will run to 8,500.
8,500. Yeah, I think we have a joke in in my kind of friends group, this one guy has a classic mini pup. I think it's a 998, and he has like his little tack red needle, and it's like set at like 2,500. I was like, I think you could go a little bit more than that, man. I'm probably calling him out. It's probably like $3 or $4 grand, but it's funny. We're like, hey, rev that out a little bit more. But you heard it here first, Ricky. You know, you're okay. Put a rev limiter on it so you don't mess it up. Is there anything
you know, the reliability is really defined by how much RPMs you run on it. It really is. If you run it at 6,500, it'll run for 3 years without touching it, probably.
Wow.
You know, it depends on how hard you push it. It's just that simple.
Yeah. Is there anything that you do to kind of keep the historic kind of Mark One, like, you know, it's a lot of people like, don't cut up a Mark One factory, you know, that kind of stuff needs to look like it came off the showroom floor. Like, how do you kind of tiptoe that line?
Well, we don't actually cut it up at all. This is not much of video in this thing, but I'd love to show you a couple of the other cars. I may do that. Take this camera over and show you a couple of other cars. For the most part, they're not cut up at all. We don't have to cut the spoiler in. We don't have to do anything special. You know, the body that you're seeing behind me is a 1960 body. So indeed, you have to cut a hole for the shift linkage in that, because the 1960 they had a magic wand shifter out the front of the floor.
Right.
But other than that, there's nothing you have to do to make them. You know, we put flares on them because we're all running 6-inch wheels. But other than that, there's no cutting necessary.
Yeah.
So
that's mostly reversible.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And my daughter is thinking about taking that race car of hers, and she may make it back to a street car one day. She's not ready to give up yet, but she's not far from it, I'm afraid. Unless I buy it back from her, and then I may just keep it as a race car myself. But yeah, I mean, you look over. I mean, there are vintage cars that are running vintage cars that are highly, highly modified, and they'd be very difficult to get back to a street car. In my case, I have one car that would be tough to make back to a street car, but I bought it that way. I didn't make it that way. If you look at the Monte Mini, it could be a street car any day, and you'd have to raise it up because it's too low to the ground. But you know, in the 61, 62, 63, that's that family of cars that I have. All are easily streetable. You know, they don't have windshield wipers on them or anything like that. But you haven't lost anything to make them as street cars.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I can kind of see that from that perspective. Like you're not really, and like you kind of mentioned before, you're not allowed to change pickup points and that kind of stuff. So it kind of makes it easy to kind of stay in the guidelines there.
Right. I'm just gonna walk over. I'm gonna walk over this way a minute.
Oh sure, yeah. Let's see this for you guys that are watching. I can kind of showing this Mini.
How to do this.
Oh yeah, this is cool.
Not a very good way of doing that.
That's okay.
I'm going to walk over here, though. This is you talk about originality. I got to share this one with you. This is the rest of the shop.
Oh wow, look at this. So Mini, is that a MG there?
Yeah, that's a midget. Yeah, a midget that we're working on. Right. But
there's
this is the 62 car. If I can figure out how to hold this camera right.
Look at that. That's awesome.
And then this one in the corner, when I get there. This one in the corner here, I don't know where I'm going to or not. This is the Monte Mini. Okay. And you can see we're running, where's it at? We're running Weber carburetor.
Okay.
And originality, that's where I started coming. I wanted to come over this way. Oh, if I can get this picture taken, halfway decent.
Oh wow, look at that.
This is the dash of my car. And notice the car that I drive most often, which is the 61.
Right.
Notice the binnacle in the center. That looks like an absolutely bone stock binnacle.
Yep.
It isn't, but it looks like it. The difference The difference is the gauges on the either side are 2 5/8 instead of 2 inch.
Okay.
And what looks to be a speedometer is actually the tack.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, yeah. It actually, the guy that did it, I wish I knew who it was anymore because I can't find him anymore. The guy that did it for me said he would never do another one. But,
Pain in the butt.
oh, yeah, yeah. It was a monumental task to do.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, I've seen excuse me, watching some of the UK mini races, like the Swift Tune stuff. They have in-car footage, and they just have like the tack right in the front,
Yep.
and their speedo just is there for show. It looks like, but that's cool. That's a good idea to kind of
Yeah,
flop
yeah,
it
yeah.
to a tack.
Yeah, I would love to do that again. I actually talked to a couple other people just recently to do it again, but I haven't found somebody willing to do it at a rational price.
Yeah, yeah, 'cause no one wants to mess with that.
Yeah,
So
well,
that
it's a very technically a very difficult thing to do.
yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. So you kind of showed the Weber carburetor. Do most of your cars run SUs, Webers, a little bit of
Yeah.
both?
All of my cars run Webers.
Uh,
The some of the governing bodies would rather have you run SUs,
mm-hmm.
but I've got 7 or 8 cars and we're running Webers on all of them, and I would tell you that 90% of the cars out there have Webers.
Really?
Um,
Hmm.
well, again, when you're looking for performance, and when you build a motor, you cannot build it. I don't care what you think. You're not going to build two identical motors, and to get the best performance out of those, every motor I build goes on a dyno, and to get the best performance out of that, you have to be able to tune the carburetor.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And tuning an SU is an art that I wouldn't even think I know how to do. Um, while tuning, I mean, on a street car, it's easy.
Right.
But to get that last 5 horsepower
Yeah.
is not easy. And be able to tune it is critical. And Webers you can tune.
Makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot more tunability to the Webers. My S came with two, I think 45s, and I was looking at them the other day. I've never messed with a Weber before. I was like, wow,
Came
there's a
with
lot of different jets and this. Yeah, it came with two.
Two. Are they Italian Webers?
Yep. Yep.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. The
okay.
engine, I think, is a plus 20, and there's a huge Weber bulkhead cutout. So I was thinking he's going to either run a split Weber or dual. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Airboxes are frowned upon, but actually I have airbox in one of my cars, but they call it an airbox. They put a Weber long center branch Weber manifold on it.
Nice.
Most of my cars do not have the cutout, um, simply because they don't want it, and I get good performance out of them without that. So,
Right. 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 Yeah. I'm probably going to put the bulkhead back, and I could still run the Weber. I think with the certain manifold, but haven't
oh, you
dug that.
can absolutely you can. I mean, all of my cars, are all but one, have Weber manifolds that doesn't require the cutting the bulkhead off.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I thought. This guy, I don't know. He just wanted to go big, I guess.
Well, there is something to be said for having a longer runner on the intake manifold.
hmm
And the to get a Weber to fit in a Mini without that cutout means you have what they almost a swan neck manifold, which is a difficult one to get decent flow out of.
Right. Well, it
So
makes sense.
yeah,
I'll dig deeper into that later. Maybe I'll pick your brain when I get to that point.
yeah, okay, okay.
We touched on earlier. We were talking about the the world in general is social media and that kind of stuff. How do you think that has kind of affected the classic vintage racing? Have you seen it kind of trickle in at all? Is there less involvement? Because I think it's something that a lot of people would enjoy, and and we can kind of touch on. You mentioned that you rent out your minis, and I think that's a great kind of entry for people like me that want to get into it. I just don't know how to.
Yeah, yeah. I think social media has greatly impacted vintage racing. And obviously, I've been doing it for an awful long time, and I've seen a tremendous amount of change in the and I'll call it a sport, call it an industry. There are now a couple companies that are running vintage races for profit. They're no longer just club events.
Mm-hmm.
The group down in your area, Vera and CSRG, are both club groups. SVRA, which is a nationwide group, is in for profit. Everything is done for that. But it has grown the vintage race business, as a sport, tremendously in the last 10 years for sure.
Yeah, no, that's
One of the downsides about vintage racing is that the cars have become so valuable that when I first started racing, I could race against Ferrari Testarossas and Lamborghini. You name it, they were
right.
out there. They didn't care. They weren't that expensive. The fella that I raced with off the lot spent $2,500 for his Testarossa. He didn't care. He put it on the track. Now,
Wow.
when he passed, it was sold for 25 million or something, some stupid amount of money.
Right,
But
right.
but today, the problem with vintage is that the real historic old cars don't get out very often anymore
Mm-hmm.
because they're worth too much money,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
collectors have picked them up, and,
Yeah,
and I think that has aided the Mini from the standpoint that it is still affordable at some level,
right.
uh, and it's a way to get into racing without trying to spend that money on a Ferrari or whatever else.
Yeah, it makes sense. And that
Yeah.
was kind of one thing that, in my head with either one of my minis, I was like, man, they're going up in value. Obviously, it's still very attainable for a lot of people, but then I kind of come back to, well, one of my minis I got for free. The other one I found and I got a deal on it for $1,500. So it's like, I
That,
mean, but that's a
yeah,
dime. But those are once in a lifetime type of things. So I got really lucky and fortunate for that. But if I ever crashed, I'd be like, oh no, like
it's
finding
all
another S would be very difficult.
for the most part, they're all fixable. Again,
Yeah.
the one that I did not fix had, it's a long story short, but that one wasn't worth fixing. But I've wrecked more than one, and it's just money. It just
Yeah,
takes money to fix it.
that's
That's all.
true. It's only
And
money.
as you said, you can get every panel in the car. You can buy
Yep.
a body shop. Um, so
Yeah,
in that respect, it's the end of the world.
I was sifting through one of the Mark One mini forums, and this one guy pulled out this old Mark One. I don't remember if it was a S or not, but it was an early Mark One, and it was just completely rotted. And I don't know if he actually used a single panel on that car, but he like would take a one piece off, build a jig, put a new panel on, and kept it. Was just like, so it was a
Yeah,
brand new car in the end. I was like, what? Would you kept the VIN? I guess I don't know.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Incredible.
yeah.
Incredible. That's funny.
Well, a properly restored Mark One Cooper S is worth a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's true. So I kind of want to jump back to racing a little bit. Any particular tracks or events that kind of stand out as highlights over your career?
my favorite expression is the last one I ran was the best. Um, I've been fortunate enough. I've run at Spa in Belgium. I've run
Wow.
Brands Hatch. I've run Silverstone. I've run a track in France whose name I can't remember. I ran in Australia, um, and they're all super experiences. Everyone's a great experience. Um, I participated at the Monterey Historic Races for 37 years. Um, and I lived in San Jose at the time, so San Jose, Laguna Seca was my home track, if you will. And now I'm up here in Northern California, further north, and therefore Sirius Point is closer for me than Lime Rock. Than Lime Rock. I did Lime Rock and Watkins Glen too. Anyway, and I don't know. It's hard to say which is my favorite track. There are some that are not as nice. I don't particularly like Portland. It's not much of a mini track. Um, I love Lime Rock. That's a long tow. Um, but no, I don't. I can't tell you there's one favorite track.
Did you race minis on all those tracks or different
Yeah,
cars? Wow,
minis.
that's cool. That's very cool. And did
Yeah.
you was it last year the first year or maybe the second year with the Minis and Mustangs. Was that Laguna Seca or
That was Laguna Seca, yeah.
did you
Yeah.
race in that or?
Oh, it was my event. It was my idea.
Oh, you brought that here? That's awesome. I used to watch that
Yeah.
on YouTube. Like I think it started in Australia.
Yeah, the organizers of that event, the Velocity event, came to me and said, "Could you put together some minis to come to this event?" And of course I could, but I suggested because I've run this Mini versus Mustang thing, and I think the Spa race was Mini versus Mustang.
Okay.
Uh, uh, I've run that before, and I suggested to him, let's do something different. And so therefore, the Mini versus Mustang came about.
Oh, so
Uh,
cool.
and it is just taken off like gang fire. I mean, the biggest problem we have is the Mustangs are afraid of us. Um, we
Oh,
can't
it's
get
so
them.
cool. It's so
We can't
fun to
get.
watch. I love it.
Yeah, we're going to do it again this year at Sonoma. So the first year, my son won in my 177 car. The next year, the Mustangs took first and second place because the Mustang does have an awful lot of horsepower,
Right.
and Laguna Seca is kind of horsepower.
Okay.
Um, but this coming year, we're going to do it at Sonoma, Sears Point, and the minis will kill them there.
Let's go. Yeah, I'm looking forward to. Really wanted to come last year, and I just had prior obligations. So this year, I'm looking forward to kind of coming
Yeah,
and watching. It's gonna be cool.
yeah, plan on it. We need lots of help in the pits too. There'll be we should get 20 minis, I would think, easily,
Oh, cool.
and
I'm totally down for that. That'd be so much fun.
everybody needs help in the pits, so you can come and help in the pits.
Awesome. That's cool. So we talked. We've obviously talking about tons of minis. You started racing with, Porsches and other cars. Is there something that what's that it factor that the Mini brings that maybe somebody might not know until they like race it or drive it or something like that? What was that for you?
Oh boy, that was so long ago. I can't remember. I mean, I can reflect on a better reflection might be I've had the opportunity now because I rent these cars out to have a lot of people experience it for the first time, and maybe that's a better thing to share.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely amazing to me. Nobody has ever got into one of these cars and didn't come back and say it's the most fun they've ever had. And these guys are serious racers. I mean, the guy that drove one of them, that Velocity, owns the Testarossa, owns this. I mean, he's just, he raced five different cars that weekend. And I put him in the Mini, and he says, that's more fun than anything else I've ever driven. They are absolute fun, and everybody loves them. I mean, without a doubt, well, I say this with some pride in that. Without a doubt, we were the hit of the whole Velocity event the
Oh, I
last two
believe
years.
it. I
Uh,
believe it.
just the minis. Everybody loves the Mini. Everybody loves the Mini.
It's really
So
hard not to. Yeah, I was really nervous when I got mine, when I finally got it running, that it was going to let me down. I just had it hyped up in my mind for years. I've always wanted the Mini. That's my dream car, as cliche as it is. But man, and it was like, it was, just not set up right. It didn't even have a good alignment yet. And I was just like, I took one turn. I was like, wow, this is just the biggest smile on my face. And then when I got it kind of dialed in, it's the best. They're so much fun. Yeah,
yeah,
it's true.
they really are. Yeah, just a fun car to drive.
It is. Any cool upcoming projects or events outside the Minis Mustangs coming up this year?
Well, we're going to do Monterey Historics again, a Monterey reunion again this year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we've got. I'd like to get back and run Donington in England this year if I can pull that off. I'm not sure I'll make that happen, but I think I'll try. We're going to go run Indianapolis again. Um, we did that, I don't know how many, 3 or 4 years ago now, and managed to win the class, so that was good. Um, Other than that, I mean, we're going to run 20 events this year, I'd guess, by the time we're done.
Wow. Wow. That's awesome. Hopefully I'll be out to at least one of those to kind of support and check out you guys racing. It's definitely a bucket list of mine. And then maybe I'll rent out
There,
one of the minis one day.
there are a couple minis running down in Southern California.
Yeah.
Bart Smith is running a car, and Graham is running his car.
Yep.
Heritage Garage guy is running his car.
Yep.
Mm. So there's a couple running down there. I think that's the only two that I know of down that neck of the woods.
Yeah, I joined the Vera Facebook page and trying to get on those newsletters because I really do want to kind of get into it, whether it's autocross or just some sort of event track day type of thing. But
Mhm.
it's definitely a
Yeah,
bucket list. And
you just mentioned something, track days. That's another very strong opportunity today that didn't exist back in the day. A place like Hooked on Driving has happened to be the one I was associated with for a number of years.
hmm
They provide a track day, and in a lot of the, I don't know about all of them, but at least in Hooked on Driving, which I was participated in, they provide instructors, and you can take your bone stock street car out there and
yeah,
learn how to race. It's relatively inexpensive, a lot cheaper than running a vintage race for sure.
right.
You can do it on bone stock cars. Most of the cars there are going to be bone stock cars. They're the street cars. Um,
Yeah, I don't remember what track it is, but I know they do like I think they call it high performance track day or something like that. And yeah, you could take whatever car you want. So the problem is a lot of it's 2+ hours for me, and I don't have a trailer, so driving the Mini.
but, they, but they're street cars. I mean, they'll take street cars, and it's not a big deal. I mean, I have a friend of mine that drives a Miata at those things all the time.
Right.
It's his street car. He drives it here to have us test something all the time. I don't know. He's not particularly good mechanic, so he brings it over here for us to work on. And but he drives it to the track. He doesn't care. He
Yeah.
drives it to Laguna. He drives it to Sears.
Well,
Because it's a
Don,
street.
I'm not afraid to drive my Mini. I just recently, well, I guess last September, I got back from a road trip. I took it up to Idaho, drove it up to Idaho. We did a little vintage kind of car rally across Idaho, and then I drove it back down the coast of California back here. So it was a
Yeah,
3,000+ mile hump.
yeah, sure. So you could drive it 2 hours to go to a race, and
Yeah. We'll just have to get up super early, or the night before. Night before.
night before, sure, yeah.
Yeah. All right. All right.
And
Challenge accepted.
some of the events are actually 2 day events.
Okay.
Um, I mean, I think obviously the fee goes up for 2 days versus one day. But the nice
Right.
part about it is a lot of the groups will actually have you have an instructor driving with you for the first half a day. And tell you where the apexes are. Tell you
That's cool.
brake, turn, and accelerate. Tell you
Right.
all that all the time.
Right. That's cool. Yeah, no, that would be a blast. So,
It's a much better way to get into it than autocrossing.
okay. Yeah. I I think autocrossing for me is just kind of like a fun little maybe weekend thing, but the track days definitely is a little more up my alley, but yeah.
I've been I used to go to mini meets all the time. Every mini meet ever existed, I went to for years. And recently, I don't remember where it was. I think it was up Northwest meet. I was coming back from a vintage racing, so I had the vintage race car with me. And I tried to autocross that, and that was just so bad. No, it's not set up for an autocross. It's set up for very high speed stuff. And then you go
Yeah.
the speed to an autocross, it's totally different. I mean, my car would do almost 60 miles an hour in first gear.
Wow.
Uh, so try to autocross that car. It doesn't have anything below 5,000 RPM.
Mine barely does 60 miles an hour in fourth gear. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Don, you'll have to listen to one of the previous episodes. I interviewed a guy from Team Ballylock Classics over in Ireland, and they do auto testing. Have you heard of that? It's
Mhm.
kind of like
Yeah,
a,
I know
yeah.
what
So
it
that
is.
super,
Yeah.
super interesting. I was digging that whole thing because I don't think they really have it here, but
No, no, they don't. No,
super fun.
no.
Well, Don, I know you haven't maybe listened yet, but hopefully you'll be a listener here. We do something at the end of this podcast called the Patty Probe, and just a couple quick questions that I kind of ask everybody. They could be rapid fire. You can elaborate a little bit. Just fun little mini questions. The first one is, Don, what is your
Is
favorite
it
mini variant?
is it a pass fail test?
It might be. It depends how you answer it. Some of them.
No, my favorite probably is still the Moke.
The Moke, nice. Definitely one of my favorites. Very unique.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, this is a tough one. I don't know if you can count this high, but how many minis do you currently own, and how many have you owned?
Currently, I think I have 10 or 11, But how many I've owned, I can't even come close to.
Those are goals for a lot of us.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's see here. What is your favorite modification, specifically, I'll ask you specifically for racing, that you think makes the biggest difference?
Gearbox.
Gearbox. What do you go, straight cut?
Oh
Anything
yeah,
particular?
yeah.
Speaking
Dog.
of, I started pulling my engine yesterday for those straight cut gears I pulled bought from you the other
Right,
month.
right. Yeah. But more than just straight cuts, the dog engagement straight cuts,
Okay.
which is a step above what you just got.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Very cool. Wheels, 10-inch, 12-inch, or 13-inch?
oh, 10 inch.
All day. Do you have a favorite
Oh,
wheel
yeah.
model?
Now, I run a lot of Cosmics. I don't particularly like Revolutions. Um, I got a couple Mambas too. Probably Cosmics are the best.
Why do you like that for racing?
They're relatively light. It's got the proper offset. I
Okay.
mean, I run spacers anyway, but still.
Good enough. Cool. Let's see. What's the most pain in the ass job when you're kind of setting up one of these minis? Is there something that's particular difficult or annoying?
No, one of the things that we do, we concentrate on when we build the race car, we concentrate on the ease of maintenance of it. You know, we can pull a motor out in less than an hour. We can swap motors in less than 2 hours.
Wow.
Um, and you can't do that at a racetrack. We do that at racetracks. You can't do that at a racetrack unless when you build it, you take that into consideration.
Just
You
the
know,
simplicity. You kind of simplify some things just so it's
absolutely simplify it, make it, and all the cars are done the same. All my cars are built. You know, I can swap motors. I can swap anything in those cars between any of the cars. Um, that makes it a whole lot easier. And you take that. You know, you don't put things in the way when you know, oh, I got to take that out every time I put a motor in and out. You don't do that.
right. Right.
No. You keep it simple.
Right. Last one here. If you could have a drink, a beer, coffee, or tea with one mini celeb, in quotes there, excuse me, who would it be?
Got me. I don't know. Good question. Never. That would be a really off the wall question. I have no idea.
There's too many.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Well done. I appreciate you being on here. Is there anything that you would like to plug? I know obviously minimania.com. Is there anything else, maybe with some of your events coming up?
Well, I encourage everybody to come at least watch the events if they're not racing in them. You know, we're going to do the CSRG event in a couple of weeks. We do actually in about a month. We do CSRG. About 2 weeks from now, we'll do the SVRA at Thunder Hill. Then we go back and do another Laguna Seca event, another Sears Point event, and I can't remember what happens after that.
Is
So
it
lots of events.
are those listed on Mini Mania? Are those on a certain
No,
website?
yeah, go to a site called victorylane.com.
Victorylane.com. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's a online magazine that is dedicated to vintage racing,
Okay, victorylane.com. Sweet. All right,
and
guys.
it has a worldwide schedule, worldwide schedule on it of events worldwide.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you for sharing. And guys, check out Mini Mania. There's classifieds, there's articles, there's tons of stuff on there. So again, Don, thank you so much for being on here and chatting with me. And catch you guys in the next one.